Welcome to the Roundtable with Indigenous people representative and allies as part of the How to Indigenous Governance. Sorry. Uh, I was telling that I'm Inikili Pichari from TV Indígena. I will be your co-host for today. This webinar series is brought to you with the support of Tuomas Aslak Juuso, Joseph Rumbet Media, and TV Indígena. And we could not do this without our amazing interpreters. This episode is a virtual roundtable to build on the one-on-one conversation in the previous 5 episodes by presenting thoughtful, informative text on the state of Indigenous diplomacy and governance today. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, go to YouTube and search for #HowToIndigenous_now. And you will find the full episodes and the one-on-one conversations. If you are participating in the Zoom or watching on the Facebook live stream, please let us know in the comments where you are watching from. For those that are watching on the Zoom, the Q&A feature is active, meaning throughout the episode, you can ask questions for our guests to answer it. Please, Tomo.
Hello everyone, my name is Tomo Harada. I'm a PhD candidate at the Norwegian University of Leipzig, and I'll be the other co-host with Ini today. And let me just follow Ini in welcoming you all to this roundtable. Before we start, allow me to share some quick things with you. Firstly, the webinar series will be recorded and repurposed for the Gomaluku podcast. Secondly, please engage with each other in this conversation through the chat or comments. Let each other know what your answer will be to a question that we prepared for you. And if you have heard a good quote from any of the speakers here today. Thirdly, please help us keep the conversation going on Twitter by using the hashtag #HowToIndigenousNow. And you can tag Ghazali in your post by typing at Gomaluku, Gomaluku. And feel free to share any questions, screenshots, or feedback that you might have. Fourthly, if you joined us via Zoom, interpretation is available in French, Spanish, and Russian is provided by, and they are provided by our partner Joseph. For French, we may only have French to English interpretation today. And not the other way around. So we apologize for this inconvenience. And lastly, for our guest today, please speak at a normal pace so that our interpreters can follow and put you on mute. Put yourself on mute when you're not talking, so we can focus on the speakers of the moment. So today we're joined by Tuomas Aslak Juuso, Maitin Yumon, Pavel Sulyandziga, Laila Vars, Carson Kiburo, and we have many more speakers who are running late, but they're coming, including Benota Amoy-Damai, Mariam Wallet Abakina, Myrna Cunningham-Kane, Megan Davis, Hindou Oumarou Ibrahim, Handaine Mohamed, Rajat Devasish Roy, and Ruka Sambulingi. We have a very long list of distinguished panelists here, and hopefully we will be able to hear from all of them today. And unfortunately, Graham Reed cannot join us due to the time differences. Timing is always an issue in global Zoom call, but for those of you who are here, we want to thank you very much for joining us. So without further ado, I kind of want to introduce the theme for today as a way to frame our discussions. So the theme today is how can we make the international indigenous peoples movement future-proof? The rationale for this theme that I came up with Ini is that with an ever-expanding list of UN and international processes in which indigenous people have won participation, with potential for more through enhanced participation process, there may be an emerging need to revisit and maybe rethink how indigenous peoples can use their resources to achieve and maintain full, effective, direct, and meaningful participation and representation, to increase collaboration and maximize influence across multiple and overlapping international governance mechanisms, which affect the lives and the rights of Indigenous peoples. Again, but meanwhile, this does not come without facing much more organized and resourceful pushback by coalitions of actors, which would like to see Indigenous peoples, quote unquote, parked firmly under a thick glass ceiling in order to maintain the status quo in the international system. So while the COVID-19 has temporarily halted many important meetings by and for Indigenous peoples around the world, there's still a powerful current at international level that is changing gradually and will have lasting impact for Indigenous peoples around the world. So the question today is related to international Indigenous peoples movement in the context of emerging international dynamics. So with that particular framing, I would like to kind of throw in a first question by asking the panelists, how do you see the movement coping with the rapidly changing international context and expanding mandates of Indigenous peoples across the UN? Maybe a related question is, what do you find most difficult and challenging about Indigenous diplomacies in such a complex world that we live in today? So with that, I would pass the floor to the panelists here.
Hi, Tomo, can you post the questions in the chat box that everyone will see?
Yes, I think it's posted in the chat box, but I will do it now. So once again, the question is, how do you see the movement coping with the rapidly changing international context and expanding mandates of Indigenous peoples across the UN? What is the most difficult and challenging thing about Indigenous diplomacies in this time that we're in?
Everyone quiet, so let me reflect what I think of.
Sure.
Well, good evening from my place. I see there are so many experts are here, so I expect to hear more from the elders and from the experts because I'm still in the learning process. But the way I see, there are two things. There is a positive and negative, I'll say. The positive side is you will get a space to raise your voices strongly and very collective and coordinated manner if you are. But the challenging is that whether we have the capacity actually to grasp all those development, whether Indigenous peoples are really have the capacity also effectively contribute and participate to those processes. And that's also relating to the political development from our side. The challenge also whether our political development is good enough already to deal with all those critical issues. So this is the thing, so also have to say. And if you talk about then connecting to this movement with the diplomacy, from my point of view, this is also more critical. And now diplomacy, you have theoretically so many channels. And our Indigenous people's experience are the only track two channel. Meanings like informal discussion, closed door meeting, or formal discussion, not the state to state, but with the diplomats and the Indigenous people's delegates. That's where our scope. Now the challenge is that whether we really can influence to the decision makers, even though their mandates are increasing, whether we really can contribute or we have that capacity to contribute. So this is the thing what I wanted to share, the positive and negative side, the challenges.
Thanks, Vinota. Hindou, and followed by Laila.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's really great pleasure to see you. I can just go to your questions. This is also how indigenous diplomacy it's moved from the seeing physically to this virtually. And for this one, I really wanted to thank all our indigenous colleagues. And yeah, thank you, Ghazali, for initiating the movement of how we are changing our diplomacy. Of course, we are doing that in a different way with different organizations who are not indigenous organizations, who invite us as persons to join some virtual events. But it's not often that as indigenous peoples, we create our own platform and come and move our internal diplomacy. So that's why I really appreciate this platform. Then I'm always like, will be available to join it if my time and my internet accommodate me. But let me tell you two things. Firstly, our indigenous diplomacy are affected in this time because the internationals is moving very, very fast, and suddenly they is still moving in the same business as usual. It is not inclusive as we wish to have. They are choosing the peoples who are getting the opportunity and who are privileged to get access to all the devices. I can say electricity is the first one. If you don't have electricity, you can charge any of your devices. It can be your phone you are using, iPad, or your computer. Secondly, if you don't have internet connection, you cannot get access to this movement that's going very fast around the world. And looking indigenous peoples across the globe, even those who are coming from developed countries, they are those who are living in the remote areas, who do not have access to the internet, even if they have access to the electricity. And if we come back to the indigenous people living in developing countries, I give you the direct example of myself. When we start the lockdown in Chad, I start going through the webinars. And it was just 4 months ago. Hey. It was very hot. So my divided from my phone to my computers, getting hit in every 15 minutes. I have an ice bag next to me where I have to log out from each of the webinar to put my computer and my phone to just to get them 5 minutes of refresh. And I restarted. So in this kind of webinar, I have to log in and out at least 5 times. So I got this. I'm lucky I was in town. I have electricity, I have internet, but all my climate is not allowing me. And the second is the language barriers. Is still, they are keeping the English or the French, something like that, to be the language of the communication around all the international movement. And that is not allowing the indigenous peoples who are at the community level to interact and react with those peoples. If you have your internet, you cannot. And it is so frustrating for me to see how they are creating a gap between the indigenous communities and the non-indigenous communities, between the international movement and the not international movement who do not have all the access and all the process. So this is the negative part I'm seeing. The second point is from the positive part. I really miss seeing all of you physically and exchange because it's completely different. I can take my phone, talk with you, but when I see you 1 minute, it's make my day, it's give me a lot of learning. But however, meeting you through the webinars, I saw the brothers and sisters from Pacific, from Arctic, from North America, Russia, Asia, Africa. So we is still keeping in touch. This is really, really nice. We are moving in the same way. And in this point also, we are still connecting to the international change from all the different negotiations, human rights or environment protection or our right. We are still advocating, telling them that we are there. We are the front line. We get the solutions, and we must talk. And we are talking. We are catching up with them. We are doing all our best to catching up. So, in my conclusions, we do have a gap there, but we are still following, and we will not going to give up. Our movement, it's ongoing movement, and that's why we all united, we can make it happen. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Hindou, and thanks for being here despite difficulty in connections, and of course we thank our interpreters always for allowing people to listen in from all over the world. This is quite incredible how we put together all this. So thank you. So Laila, you're the next on the speakers list, followed by Ghazali, and we already have a long list of speakers. So try to keep it as compact as possible, but please, it's your time, Laila.
Kiitos, and hello to everyone here from the Sámi territories. I hope you can all hear me. Those are some really tricky questions that you have given us, and to try to answer all of them in a short time is of course impossible. But I would really like to thank you for organizing these events, because each one of these webinars have given some input, I guess, to many indigenous peoples, representatives, organizations, to how they can continue working within the indigenous peoples movement, although we are in this situation where we can't travel and can't really meet in person. How do I see the indigenous movement coping with the rapidly changing international context? Well, I think if there is one thing that indigenous peoples are good at, that is that indigenous peoples have always been pushed and being challenged in so many ways. Well, whether it's about land rights, territories, about disputes about territories and land rights and resources. There could be issues about culture and cultural objects being taken away from indigenous peoples without their free, prior and informed consent. And indigenous peoples have always been able to find new ways of addressing these issues, whether it's through diplomacy, through working through organizations, working together with other indigenous peoples, or by using media, using human rights organizations, using national human rights institutions, using researchers as supporters in their in this kind of processes. So I think indigenous peoples are really skilled when it comes to making their voice heard. And if I'm just to highlight one thing that I find very important is capacity building, because what we really need is that indigenous peoples do the capacity building in their own societies. And what do I mean by capacity building? That's kind of just to make sure that the young people, already starting from kindergarten, schools, that they are being taught their own history, that they learn to be proud of their own ancestry, that they know that this is nothing that they should be taken for granted, that they need to still fight for it in the future, that it's, although their growing up in an era where Indigenous people's rights are much more respected and much more implemented than in the past, they still need to be focused on how to implement the right to self-determination of their own people and how to continue this process. So I think there's important to focus on capacity building and use all platforms, or as many as platforms as you can, as many platforms as you have the capacity to engage yourself, use the media, document your own daily life and how different kind of development projects, as they call it, how this kind of new colonization is happening in different regions. Use the different UN bodies. Make sure that you have some sort of educate your own youth and your own people in how to use those mechanisms that are available for us. I know the expert mechanism where me and my colleague Binota are members, we have for the past years been focusing a lot on building a bridge between the UN human rights bodies, the treaty bodies, and the expert mechanism, so that we're able to make sure that the treaty bodies also know Indigenous people's rights and know the declaration and know how to use it and how to interpret it, and that we have this ongoing dialogue with the treaty bodies in the UN, so that they also, when they get this complaint, the individual communications from Indigenous peoples, that they are able to understand fully the complexity of those complaints. So I would also say that the most challenging thing with the current situation is probably that we hear that many private sector entities, business, are using the opportunity to provided them by the pandemic to continue with all sorts of industrial development projects on Indigenous people's lands, and that is very difficult to address when we know that many Indigenous peoples are not able to, as Hindou said, they don't have access to internet in all areas, they don't have access to media, they don't have access to those ways that they could tell the world what's going on. So I guess that's a huge challenge, and then they cannot make sure that the world is knowing how rapidly things are happening and changing in their own region. So just to sum up, use the national human rights institutions. They are there also for Indigenous peoples. Use the human rights organizations. Build up your own organizations and make sure that your people are being represented in those forums which are most important for your people. And no Indigenous people is exactly the same as the other. So for some Indigenous peoples, it might be more important to engage on the regional level and to use their kind of resources on a local and regional level. For others, it might be most critical to be a part of the permanent forum process, to be able to participate on the international level. So I guess it's a matter of capacity building and to have a strategy for how to implement your right to self-determination. And we all have those mentors, those elders who we can ask, who have been doing this for decades, who are an inspiration for us every day. And I know many of you have been talking about those earlier in this program. I know Tuomas has been mentioning it, and that's the way how we do it and how most indigenous peoples do it. We get inspiration and advice from our elders on how to go about, even though we know that there is a new generation coming up, and they have a totally different background. They have skills that many of our elders don't have, in like technical skills, the skills of using social media platforms to engage. So I guess that's just a brief start to the discussion on how to make sure the Indigenous people movement will survive in the future also. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. We have now Handaine and Rodion and others joining us. So we will hear from them once. Of course, Devasish as well. Nice to see you. And we'll be hearing from them later on. But for now, we'll move on to Ghazali.
Yeah, just wanted to throw in my 2 cents in this whole conversation. I appreciate Laila and Hindou and everyone else already has spoken already and are going to speak. I just wanted to throw in and very much underline what Laila has said. Just want to throw in something that at least one of my observations in terms of the movement. What you can see right now is that the movement is very agile. We moving before COVID. You could see indigenous peoples, for example, in the climate change context, biodiversity context, adapting to fast changes. Like it's, for example, when you go to a COP, Conference of Parties, you see indigenous peoples strategizing and being very agile, making sure that we are in every discussion that is taking place. And that agility, I think that it goes to the core, maybe to one of the DNA of indigenous peoples, or flexibility, resiliency, being able to adapt to different situations. So COVID-19, I don't want to talk too much about it. It is definitely, you can see that indigenous peoples are adapting to from in-person meetings to virtual meetings, trying to make the best out of it. The thing is, when we come back to in-person meetings, and what I already saw before COVID-19 is, the changing international context, which we're dealing much more with blocks, with groups, alliances now from a state point of view, and which makes it easier as well as more difficult for indigenous peoples to influence decision making. One, you have, of course, if you want to go to a certain group, you go to the chair. That makes it easy. But once once that group is, you see that there's a disagreement within the group, and then you have to try to get access into the group and have to find out which one is which state is opposed to your findings or what you are proposing. So in terms of agility and the coping with the ever-changing indigenous peoples changing with the international context, I think what I see right now is that we already are spread thin. I think that also goes to what Laila says in terms of capacity building and making sure that the movement grows. It is that we are creating these amazing new processes. We are creating these new platforms under climate change, biodiversity, you name it. But you also see, I see an overlap. I see an overlap in people that are members on one panel or a working group, and are also experts on, which is okay. I'm not saying that it's all a testament to the skills and their expertise, but I also see, like, I'm very conscious of what happens on the other side? Are we building up this movement? Are we making sure that that all these people, these veterans, these very experts, that are very much skilled in everything, are we making sure that people that do want to participate in the movement, are we making sure that we are giving them the the possibilities, the opportunities, and the confidence to do so? So I think that that's just my observation when you ask this question. That is my first thought, and just would like to hear other people's thoughts on it.
So thanks, Ghazali, and he posed some interesting framing of the issues and questions at hand, and maybe if Rodion and Tuomas can follow up and add to the conversation, but also your perspective to the questions. So we'll go with Rodion first, and then Tuomas, followed by Pavel.
Yes, hello to everyone, and thank you, Tuomas, for cheering us, and also firstly thanks to Ghazali, Tuomas, and all your team for your brilliant work and idea to bringing us together. I hope not for the last one, but it's so appreciated, because under the pandemic time, I think that is the best way and methods how we can work together, and also to have a brainstorming and to strengthen our global movement at all levels, and also bring some kind of new approach, new ideas. And also I would like to start to reiterate once again that under all our efforts at the global and domestic level to make some changing, ironically, we address political, economic, and the legal system that are not of our own making. And we are forced to participate in structures and procedure designed, constructed, and executed by the governments, who continue to act as guardians to peoples they have reduced in number, name, and spirit, by refusing and reframing indigenous fundamental rights to self-determination and self-government. It means that we are already in a challenging position at the starting line on our way to negotiate. But it also means that we have to accept this games of rule. We have to increase our skills, negotiation skills, our diplomacy skills, based on our own principles and values, and of course, human rights. And so far, we are having some kind of strong fundamental platform. We are having Declaration on Indigenous People Rights. We are having 3 platforms under the United Nations, MRIP, Permanent Forum, and Special Rapporteur position. And most of Indigenous peoples are still looking with their great hopes how we can work together at the United Nation level. But I believe it's not enough. And I hope that today we can also elaborate time to discuss how we can work at the UN, but also beyond of the UN, to provide synergy and to increase our advocacy at all levels. And for me, one of the main challenges we have to strengthen, it's our advocacy and working with the private sector and corporation. I believe you know that we are having annual forum on human rights and business based in Geneva every year. But I strongly believe we need a special platform on indigenous peoples and business. Why? Because looking at the declaration, it's not a legal binding document. It's some kind of consensus and a strong message to the national government. But it's always up to the national leaders or political will. But if you look at the business story, most of business are making the global activity and the global corporation. And they have to have global responsibility, acting as a main producer of global market. That is one of, I think, issue we can talk more. And the second one, we also should increase our thematic solidarity and joint working under the United Nations. And recently, the new consortium already established to coordinate more between CBD process, climate change process, and sustainable development goals, which is also good progress. How the indigenous peoples are quite well self-organized at the UN level. And the next point is now, I think, under the global agenda, what is a green economy? Because from many indigenous perspectives, it looks like a green colonialism. So I think it's a new global agenda. We should be very actively engaged, particularly with the environmental society, in order to create new alliances and new partnership. Particularly to oppose again the green business also. And finally, beyond of the UN framework, I think we can use other mechanisms, for instance, like European Parliament, in order to arrange annual hearings on specific or thematic indigenous people situation and monitoring. European Union is still our old friend on our under the global agenda and on our way to find friends at different kind of platform, and domestically and also global. So this is just my ideas how we should work and strengthen our indigenous movement under the United Nations, but also beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, Rodion, and I'm sure Pavel would have a lot to add about the business and human rights side, and we will hear from him later on. But next is Tuomas. I see that you're working right now with the petitions against mining companies, and maybe you can expand a little bit about what Rodion was talking about in terms of dealing with businesses and companies in this time under the pandemic situation, but broadly as well.
Thank you, and good day to you, to everybody out there, wherever you are, whatever is your timing. To your question, Tomo, I think that as the global agenda in the world has been kind of set on combating the climate change, finding energy solutions that provide the world the opportunity to make the switch from fossil fuels away. I think that is a really important aspect to take into account and prioritize also how we can work it in a global aspect. I think that the Forum on Business and Human Rights is one opportunity. I think that the movement as a globally can try to do better there. There have been individuals, indigenous peoples participating there, and that is good, but I think that in numbers, it might be a little bit more stronger. private sector is a different kind of actor. I think that combining MRIP to these discussions from kind of a strategical point is also a huge opportunity for the movement. Not sure how well the movement is in the new mandate of MRIP, and I'm not gonna take the role on explaining it. We have many MRIP members here, but engaging in the private sector is one new aspect in MRIP, and how we can utilize that, how we can build the third sector partners to be more trustworthy for that kind of processes. I think that is an interesting aspect. But we do see, though, especially here from the Sámi side, I guess from all of the for countries that extractive industries, energy industries are really trying to more push for those minerals, for those resources that we have. For example, the mining petition or the address that I have been delivering this week to the different ministers and Ministry of Environment is one example how you can try to engage the population of different nationalities in your nations. We got 37,000 signatories for an address, where we have only 10,000 individuals, Sámi individuals on the Finnish side of Sámi. And that is one example where if you can identify those groups, peoples that are willing to support your issues, it's a good way of showing that you are not alone. That builds then more political spaces to be more influential in different processes and utilizing all of different aspects. Now, this of course needs capacities, it needs individuals, and I fully agree with what Laila was saying. Also what Hindou was saying, that basic kind of needs has to be built up for indigenous peoples also. It cannot be, and these especially global UN processes cannot be developed in ways where indigenous peoples might not have possibilities to participate. That the participation has to be also confirmed. But going back to the first question, that how the movement is coping in a rapidly changing international context. Of course, the COVID situation is challenging, and these forums, platforms on internet are important. There were a lot of good points already said, so I'm not going to re-erase those. But the second part of the first question that was handed to us is pretty interesting. Expanding mandates of indigenous peoples across the UN. Well, this question can be understood in many ways, but I think that my understanding is pushing it to more of also to the capacities how we can represent ourselves in UN. Let's say that we some time will be successful in the enhanced participation, and we will be having representative institutions participating to the GA level. And what is that actually then requiring from our movement? It is requiring some of the points that has been said already in the previous episodes. The presence in New York, Geneva, Rome, all of the UN places. In order to be able to represent yourself in the way of having the permanent observer status under GA, you would have to be able to be present in those spaces where decisions are made, negotiations are established in a week. How do you do that? What do you need? Capacities, of course. People, of course. But you need resources. You need monetary resources also to be able to build those. How we as a movement can tackle that is pretty interesting, Dean, and it could be even a topic of a new series new episodes. But I of course support that we got more and more episodes. We like this to do this. So, but now, so those kind of aspects are something to be considered, and of course to be firstly successful, that our institutions are getting the possibility to accredit themselves to the discussions and to be part of those discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tuomas. I just want to kind of follow up a little bit on the capacity, and I think this questions maybe go for all of you. Obviously, Indigenous people are focusing on all levels of our society, from domestic to international, to remain vigilant. But Tuomas, as a representative of the Sámi Parliament, how do you specifically prioritize or keep an eye on all the processes that are happening that matters to the Sámi people? What's your kind of criteria or your thoughts behind setting priorities and also trying to keep up with everything that is going on? How do you do it as a representative?
Well, of course, it's important to understand that we have structures in place in our institutions. We have been able to establish those institutions, so they are allowing us opportunities. We have secretariats, we have politicians, we have been building the representative nature. There is constitutional recognition, there are mandates to represent the people on an international level too. So the state cannot deny our engagement. Of course, the UN is a big, and we, for example, as a parliament, Sámi Parliament on the Finnish side, have in our staff one member that is supposed to follow all the processes. But it's important to remember that we're not doing this work alone. So we, for example, coordinate inside of and with other Sámi parliaments on fields of who is covering who and how do we, and what kind of positions we are pushing there. And of course, cooperation with the Inuits in the Arctic context allows us more individuals, more capacities to be divided in the UN field. So strong coordination in our region has always been, in my view, the mix in the soup that Ghazali likes to say, that has made us successful, in my view, and therefore we've been able to be part in different kind of discussions and are repeatedly engaging in different kind of discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tuomas. So we have Pavel and then Binota, and then we will probably move on to the next question then. So you have, if there are any other speakers, you can hold your thoughts and then maybe come back to it later. So Pavel, please. Welcome.
Спасибо большое, Тома. Я всех приветствую. Еще раз хотел бы выразить огромную благодарность и признательность Ghazali и Туомасу Аслаку, всем вашей
and everybody, to the whole team that offered us this brilliant job and this perfect opportunity to talk. Answering your question, which is very important, the strategical side, I would like to say that previous speakers said that the situation in the world is changing rapidly. I remember our generation started in the whole new context, whole different context. We didn't have any departments in the UN that would discuss the indigenous peoples' issues. The situation nowadays is totally different. I would like to say that we should always account the changes, the changing context we live in, because they will continue to change. The situation is ameliorating. However, we have to understand that there are a lot of obstacles that are not visible at first, and they might turn into a very big obstacle. I would like to speak openly because everybody here is quite young and you will live longer. I would like to say that we didn't have those technical opportunities, those political opportunities. However, we had much more sincere relationships. If there was an issue in one region, we would contact our partners and the international movement of indigenous people, and they would reply us, they would contact us, they would show solidarity, and this reply was very quick and rapid because we were sisters and brothers and everybody understood each other. Today I see that the reaction differs. A lot of people start to think whether they have to reply or not why things develop as they do. I think that might be explained by the fact that our peoples developing and getting new jobs look back and become a part of the system that might work against the indigenous people, and they might look upon that system. So they think how this help to different indigenous people will affect themselves. Maybe they will break some laws or order. So this sincere solidarity that we really need nowadays is kind of fading out. This is why I would very strongly recommend to think about it. Getting rights and developing, we start to constrain our actions because we become a part of the system, of the governmental system. This is why I think that international movement has to think about those important and hard issues. Sure, it's very important to take high jobs, important jobs, in order to help the people. But taking those jobs, they start to become a part of the system, which might affect negatively the rest of the community. I think you have to know about it and think about it. For example, today, the governments in different countries understood that it's much easier not to fight the indigenous people, but for example, buy their leaders or give them money in order to make them a part of the system. Unfortunately, this is how we live nowadays. It's part of the reality. I think it is very important. It will happen in future because we have it now. We should understand that there is a strategy and there is tactics. And I think it is very important that the movement of indigenous people would develop the strategy based on the situation that exists nowadays. This is why I think that strategically It's very important to preserve today and in the future the solidarity. All over the world, the strength of indigenous people was the solidarity, because indigenous people might not have enough finances or resources, but they have always had solidarity. It was the force of indigenous people that the private sector and the governments had to think about. Secondly, in order to become more powerful, indigenous people have to gain allies. In order to fight some organizations, we must have partners and colleagues. We should support each other, not with our words, but with our actions. And the last thing I would like to underline is a need to build our own systems. They've been called differently: platforms, forums, systems. We have to create our own system that we could use to develop the international movement of indigenous people. The platform we have today might become a part of such system. We could teach, we could exchange ideas and opinions using this system. We have a lot of experts. We have professors, we have lawyers. Their knowledge and their experience is very important for different indigenous peoples that struggle with certain issues. We could use this experience and they could use this experience. I think it is very important to consider the system that would enlarge the potential of indigenous people work and development. Thank you.
Thanks, Pavel, always for your very insightful comments. And we just before we get on to Vinota, I kind of want to throw in the next question, which is very much related to what you have been discussing, especially in the area of business and human rights, which has been commented as one of the places where indigenous peoples have a strong interest in, but yet need to increase their presence. And just expanding that particular topic of presence, what do you think is the current blind spot in the international that the movement should get into more, pay more attention to, or need support? Is there a need to spread out more, or any other ways of trying to deal with many agencies that are currently dealing with trying to understand or deal with the rights of indigenous peoples? So I'll pass it on to Vinota, and hopefully others have some thoughts on this topic as well. So Vinota.
Hi, thank you, Tomo, and greetings, colleagues and elders, indigenous sisters, brothers who are here now listening. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are now. In the beginning, I actually I started by responding, but it was very quick and I was trying to break the silence. And now I feel like I should share something what I really think the question you have posted here. The first thing is actually, it's a very broad question for me. But the second thing also, how we actually define movement from indigenous perspective. This is also a question for me. I mean, we also need to ask ourselves. So what I have seen, or what is my observation, since 1982 working group of indigenous population started, and until now there are so many indigenous peoples organizations have grown at the national local level. But what are the challenges is also for indigenous people is so many project-based NGOs and then movement organizations where you have really a conflict at the national level in many countries. Conflict in the sense is divided indigenous peoples organizations because of there are some NGOs, there are some movement organizations, and they are not in the same line. So there's also another challenge if you talk about this rapid increase of the international context and also the movement organization situation. My third point is now coming to the self-determination rights, what I actually share many times in person with Ghazali and Tuomas in the past, my personal view, how I see it. It's a social necessity. But the way we see this is the language we also know the what UN posted or the UN DRIP we have. But on the other hand, the way we see as a social necessity, as an individual, as a collective, but in general, we the indigenous peoples, actually, my observation, I say, many of us actually don't understand the real meaning of self-determination, the indigenous peoples' self-determination. So this is where I think the gap need to bridge by the elders as well. When they started movement at the international level, until now, they have this vast experience. They need to bring this knowledge that the way they see the self-determinations and how also indigenous people should be advocated in the future in every aspect for this international development. This self-determination, why it is important, why it is not limited only the languages in the UN DRIP or international human rights instrument itself. It's beyond that what indigenous peoples have as a social necessity that we really need to contextualize. That's what I also think what we start now in the movement case. The third issue is about the capacity building, as Laila has also mentioned. My colleagues, I also say my other two AMDIP colleagues, Megan and Rodion. Rodion has also shared. And the point is the capacity building, what we also feel. That's where we also need the communication, the bridging the gap between the elders and youth in terms of understanding this indigenous people's movement at the international level. And this is where also need to bridge why indigenous people issues are more political issue than just a social economic issue. So this is the thing also I feel like we also need to see in the future context how we can bridge these gaps and continue more discussion. Now coming to this, the international context. For example, now the question came here, business and human rights. And also before that, if we see the UN declarations on the peasants, farmers' rights, we see both of these, one is drafting now process, another one is already passed, the peasants one. From my point of view, we actually don't have many experts. I mean, of course, we do have experts, but we didn't interpret some areas, more important areas in that, say, for example, even these peasant declarations where is very much conflicting with our self-determination rights. We actually didn't see this angle, and where you will see at the national level in the future when it really applies, there is a fear or conflict again, these two declarations in terms of indigenous people rights, and then your peasants and farmers coming as they are both sides as the indigenous peoples or as peasants and farmers, then you are, coming with these declarations what you have in the UN level. So you see, we are not able to really interpret that areas also. And now these treaty binding issues in the business and human rights, there are huge still debate. The self-determination rights is not still there, even in the terminology itself. Pre-prior informed consent, there is a big issue still there they are in the negotiation or they're still in the fight. So you see our capacity as well. There are rapidly changing all this international level, the mandates are expanding, but where we are now. And the next year, now civil society are advocating for the mandate of a special rapporteur on the human rights and climate change. And then of course, gradually will develop, there are so many areas. See, this is the things, our weakness, the capacity itself. So now, the last point, what I'll say, the rapidly changing international context also, like for example, in our case, one is after the adoption of the UN declarations, I see the limited discussion about the self-determination issues. The way discussed before adoption of the UN draft, in every negotiation process, that's what I heard. I was not in the negotiation process, that's what I heard, how put forward the language of the self-determination. But after the adoption of the UN draft, are we actually applying the self-determination principles in every aspect? And also on the other hand, that the World Conference of Indigenous Peoples and this system-wide action plan also, and now many UN agencies also coming up with so many approaches, and also the development agencies. This is also creating a conflict to the indigenous peoples at the national level, because donors coming with their proposal with the NGOs and the movement organizations cannot intervene because of they have the limitations at many global South countries. And then again, because they have two types of philosophies, these philosophies are conflicting in the indigenous people's rights movement. So this is the point, how it really can have a very precise, consolidated understanding our indigenous people's rights. I think this is the most important thing now we have to think of in the future. So I thank you very much.
Thanks, Binota. Before I pass on to Ini, who will continue on with the questions that have been posted on the chat, I would like to ask Mai Thin about her experience of participating in the food and agriculture organization process, and try to, if you could try to describe what kind of support you're getting from indigenous people in that particular processes, and what's your assessment of the level of interest that you feel that indigenous people are dedicating to the issues of food security and agriculture.
Right. Thank you, Tomo. So when it comes to engagement with FAO, it mainly started with our coordination and cooperation, which started with Global Indigenous Youth Caucus, and we had an agreement, and we also named it Rome Declaration on how how FAO will be supporting Indigenous youth platform. So the first one is FAO will be supporting this. We will jointly conduct like biannual Indigenous Youth Forum, where we can have like around 100 Indigenous youths from around the world, and we will have, if the process goes smoothly, then we also agreed that FAO will be supporting Indigenous youth activities, including like preparation in preparing Indigenous youths for their participation in the UN systems more effectively, and also like applying existing Indigenous youth platforms in different regions for contributing more for food security. And also to create a space for Indigenous youths to contribute more into the work of FAO regarding Indigenous peoples. So it started of course, FAO and Indigenous Youth, Global Indigenous Youth Caucus has had discussions since like long ago, but the real like sort of formal agreement started in 2016 when we first had this meeting in Rome with FAO and Global Indigenous Youth Caucus representatives from different social cultural regions. So it's been like 4 years. This year marked the 4th year that I've been engaging. And of course, I see that in FAO has been the most active, I would say. The Indigenous Peoples Department, they have been sort of the most active UN agency in communicating, and we are seeing their, how should I say, their goodwill towards working with Indigenous peoples. So we haven't been able to really advance that discussion a lot, also because of the COVID-19. Actually, it's supposed to happen in 2021, early 2021, but it seems like we will have to postpone it, or we will need to have it virtually, like this one. FAO has been really like supportive, and wherever they have sort of events, or they are very much proactive in creating space and engaging Indigenous youths, from my experience. And so from your question, to see the side, the enthusiasm of Indigenous peoples in engaging with FAO. Sometimes engaging with these UN agencies can be a little bit, how should I say, people are a little bit overwhelmed, and language barrier, and also gaps in, how should I say, communication. So it's usually they also have this, they have opened like internship programs for Indigenous youths. They have created this. So for that one, internship and work opportunities, they have been they have become much more open to Indigenous youths, and the interest, we are seeing higher interest of Indigenous youths, because especially from in Asia, like UN agencies, they are like, the agencies, working with agencies and having like making internship with UN agencies is something that is very far from Indigenous peoples. So youths become very much motivated with this opportunity that we are sharing to Indigenous youths. And also at the country level, we are like, so far I've written like dozens of recommendation letters for Indigenous youths who would like to apply for internship to FAO. So as they are also having like increasing, they are trying to increase their engagement with Indigenous peoples organizations at the regional level and at the country level. This has opened up more space for Indigenous peoples to engage more with them when it comes not only about food security, but about like this climate change and in RED+ programs. So Indigenous peoples are have become more friendly, and we are seeing more and more collaborations at the national level these days. Yeah.
Thanks, Maiten. And I forgot to, my apologies, I forgot to acknowledge Professor Davis, who is here today with us. Sports is perhaps your topic of choice. And in a global kind of scene, sports is often something that is overlooked in the political and international scene. Is it an opportunity missed? Do you think that there should be more being done to promote sports, especially the rugby or indigenous games that are played around the world? do you see a gap, or is it an opportunity missed that there isn't much going on in terms of trying to connect people with?
It's somewhat of an opportunity missed, I guess. Although it does have some, emphasis at each of the kind of mechanisms that have been set up for Indigenous peoples at the UN. But I think we've seen in the kind of Black Lives Matter kind of moment in this year, the important role that sport can play in politics. So do I think it's overlooked? Yeah, and I think, our colleagues like Chief Willie Littlechild would probably agree with that. Sport is a way of bringing people together, and it can be the great equalizer, and particularly sports like, soccer or football. Sorry, soccer we call it, but football is what I'm offending everybody. Because it is a game that so many people all over the world can play. So I think it is probably to some extent underutilized in terms of Indigenous diplomacy and peacemaking. Can I say other things?
Sure.
So I just wanted to contribute really quickly, because I always like, here she goes. I just wanted to make a few points, I suppose, about the kind of opening frame, just about some of the kind of future issues for Indigenous peoples at a global UN level. So I'm just going to make a few points and then I'll hand it over. I won't dominate, but I think we're moving into a really interesting space geopolitically in terms of the UN and this kind of post-war liberalism and this kind of disrupting of a lot of things that have been kind of, sacred at the UN, from the kind of norm of democratic governance to human rights. And we're seeing this kind of challenge to post-war liberalism and this kind of liberal egalitarianism in a way that matters that have been domesticated and captured in the UN system and this kind of democratic governance are now really challenging the space. And I think we are a peoples who have challenged that space at the UN. But some of our, colleagues would argue, and our people back home would argue, have been captured in that system, right? And I'm when I think about some of the developments going on around the world in terms of shifting sands of political systems and geopolitics, I reflect upon the debates that we had at the UN Declaration around Article 3 and Article 4, and in particular the Savings Clause, Article 46, because when we reflect on Resolution 1514 and the Friendly Relations Declaration and all of those kind of really important principles that we kind of that are embedded in Article 46, a lot of that is shifting kind of foundations now. We know that sovereignty is not regarded in the kind of strict state sovereignty sense that it has been in the past. We know that that's being opened up for contestation. We know that people are questioning the role of human rights in terms of being complicit in neoliberal market economics, and that in fact it's been a kind of bedfellow, a strange bedfellow of neoliberal capitalism that has subjugated so many people. And that questioning of human rights that has privileged individual rights and privileged, this kind of hopping into bed with the market as opposed to meeting, the threshold of a dignified human life through fundamental economic and social welfare rights. This debate is really alive in international law, and we really need to be a part of that. And we really need to think not just about, who are the experts we have in particular subject matter areas now, but how are we going to contribute to this debate, and what does it mean for the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? So I'll just kind of shut up there, but I just wanted to say, I'll return to a point that I make a lot, and that is, our challenge moving forward is to do a lot more work on the meat of on the bones of what the right to self-determination means, and not allow the market, not allow the human business sector, not allow the UN to allow free, prior and informed consent to take precedent over the right to self-determination. They're two completely different things. And so we really, and I know on MRIP, we've been trying to look at that and reorient FPIC to its kind of situate or where it was situated, and that is in third and human rights. And but sometimes I worry that we kind of have forgotten the core of what the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is. And I just echo quickly what Laila said, which I think is a really important point. We've also utilising less and less the treaty bodies, and that's a really important place for us to be, because there's still a very low literacy on the rights of Indigenous peoples within those treaty bodies, and that really is quite shocking. Like a decade after the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples has been adopted. So they're all my ideas that I'm going to throw out there, but I think there's a lot of big, weighty challenges facing our collective peoples around the world. But I would just echo the point about we're agile and we do adapt, and we have adapted, and we've been very, very successful in utilising the UN system. You know, it is a matter of not just thinking about, well, we've got all these great mechanisms, but one of the really key things I think we need to work on moving forward is political strategy. That's all.
Sorry, I've lost my mouse pointer for a while. But thank you, Megan, for your very expert opinion on legal aspects of the need for Indigenous peoples and others to focus on. Due to the interest of time, I'm going to pass it on to Ini, but I will hold Laila, and I will promise that Laila will have the first say after this. But Ini will just move on to the next question, I think, and then if Laila wants to touch upon the previous question in the next question, that is I think also in order. So Ini, thanks for co-hosting with me. Floor is yours.
They were talking. And also, our next question is related to that. How can a better collaboration amongst Indigenous diplomats across different UN processes be best achieved to avoid being siloed? So I will repeat the question, and it's written there, where is the Q&A feature is, how can a better collaboration amongst Indigenous diplomats across different UN processes be best achieved to avoid being siloed? So, and yeah, it's in the comments also. So I don't know if Laila would like to keep. I pass you the floor.
I think there was someone before me on the speakers list.
I think Handaine.
Yes.
Okay. Handaine, please. Sorry.
Handaine, tu peux parler.
Oui.
Oui.
Bonjour. Oui, ce sont des questions.
Yes, these questions are really important. The questions that have been asked in the Q&A section. I agree with Megan. I agree with what she said. Yes, indeed, the Indigenous movement is a very recent movement dating from the second half of last century. if you compare it with social movements, you will realize that the indigenous movement has gained some momentum in a very small amount of time. If you compare it, for example, with a women's equality movement or, for example, human rights movement. So we can see that the indigenous movement has saved a lot of time. And the strength of the indigenous movement doesn't come from the volume from a demographic perspective. We are only 200 million people, but this comes from the strength of our cause, the cause of the indigenous movement. And the main objective of the movement is not only indigenous people's rights, but most importantly, restoring moral and civilization balance. We are working for the restoration of humanity's memory. Humanity may lose its civilization memory, and we must be aware of this task, which is to strike a balance in terms of civilizational memory. This is the reason why indigenous peoples have decided to raise their voice by asserting their view on the world, basing themselves on two main items. From the indigenous movement, the objective now is to grow and improve the structure at national level and at international level. And the main decisive steps are the following. The movement has invested the international level of human rights. We have set a contact with the human rights movement, and indigenous movement became a necessary part of international diplomacy. The movement has smartly integrated the landscape of international diplomacy using two main items, as I just described. The first item, the first part, is to structure things at national level. Between 1992 and 2007, everywhere in the world and in Africa, more than 2,000 organizations, indigenous organizations, have been identified. In Africa, we have more than 300 organizations. In Latin America, we have IPAC and many organizations as well. The second item is training and capacity building for indigenous leaders. That's very important. Many young indigenous were able to be trained. And the indigenous movement has created diplomatic commandos. This is why, and the reason why, we have acquired many accomplishments in comparison with other social movements. Now, we must raise the question, we must rethink the movement's strategy, and we must strengthen our presence in terms of the implementation of the United Nations Declaration. As Megan said, the United Nations Declaration is a cultural is an international cultural revolution. So we must use it as the foundation, the meaning of the declaration at local level, continent level, and international level. And the message that I would like to spread and initiate is the following. We must remain by the side of indigenous people. We must have a proximity work in order to keep the warmth of indigenous people, in order to make more accomplishments in the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And this, as he was saying, actually we go with we're trying to see the structure within local, regional, internationally, and also one of the most important things that our brother uses, it's how we can train the young people. So this is one of the important things that we can accomplish a lot of our goals. So following here, I can see that I have a Laila and then Hindou.
Thank you. And I just wanted to recognize my dear colleagues, Rodion and Megan also joining. When I talked earlier, I couldn't see them. I just wanted to continue from the excellent points made by Megan on the successful way that the indigenous movement have been working the UN system and utilized it in a very good way. So you are asking about the blind spots and where should we put our efforts next, in perhaps also taking into account that many indigenous peoples are not able to participate on the international level, and particularly not in the situation where we are right now. I was just thinking about all these recommendations and advices that we have, both from the UPR process. The states get all kinds of recommendations from the special rapporteur, from the MRIP, from the permanent forum. You have the treaty body recommendations. And I guess the main worry for me as a human rights lawyer, I see this tendency that many indigenous organizations put so much efforts into the international work that they don't have the efforts to work on the implementation gap back home. And what do I mean by the implementation gap? Well, this is something that I teach students about when I give lectures, and that's it's important for both lawyers, but also for journalists and other students to understand that although we have all this new framework, we have the declaration, we have the various human rights instruments, we have the regional level instruments, but what is truly important now is to focus on the implementation gap and to make sure that we implement those standards. Human rights are intertwined, they're interlinked, so you should have a holistic approach to it and see how can indigenous people's self-determination be implemented without our children being able to learn their own language, without our youth being able to learn about our traditional knowledge, without our elders to be able to speak their mother tongue when they're in health institutions. How can we make sure that our human rights are being implemented if our people are not educated? How can we make sure that these human rights are being implemented if we don't have meaningful participation, true consultations in how to implement these standards, because there is no one size fits all for Indigenous peoples either, because we're really different. Our situations are different, and we need to look into those concrete situation for the Indigenous people in that country or in that region. Some Indigenous peoples, like my own, they have to negotiate with 4 different states on various levels. It's very challenging, as many other Indigenous peoples are in the same situation. So I guess the implementation gap will be something that we will need to, we have already been working on making recommendations for national action plans, so that many countries should have their own plans negotiated with their own Indigenous peoples on how to implement the rights of Indigenous peoples in their country. So, so on the question, what does the movement need to do today so we don't regret not doing it in 7 years? I think it's to work on the implementation. We need to have strong participation also on the national level in parliaments, and also on the local level in different regional municipalities. And as our excellent former chair of the expert mechanism, Albert Baruma, used to say, he always said this in all different meetings I've been following Albert. He always started with talking to states and Indigenous peoples. He always started with saying that solutions need to be homegrown, and that permanent solutions, they need to be agreeable. They must be homegrown, meaning that it must be something that is accepted by the Indigenous peoples. Because if it's a solution only proposed by states and implemented by states, there is no way that that is a permanent and sustainable solution. So these standards, we need to continue developing them on the international level, but I truly hope that all Indigenous peoples also put a lot of efforts and capacity into the implementation of those standards. And because that is so important also for other Indigenous peoples, because we need those cases, we need those court cases, we need those national action plans, so that other Indigenous peoples can get inspiration from that. So that is, if I should give one advice, that would be to not forget the implementation part. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. It's really like important what you said about the legal instruments there. Yeah, and we really need to work also on the implementation gap, and we can interlink both, no? But not forgetting the consultation, and it has to be accepted by the Indigenous people. And of course, the solution, it has come from different point of views, and especially from our point of views, the local also. And we need to work also with the national action plans. That's really important, and to keep following all these steps. Now we have a Hindou, please.
Thank you. I really enjoy all what brothers and sisters said here. But coming to your questions, how can a better collaboration among Indigenous peoples, diplomats across the different UN process be best achieved to avoid being silo? I will take from where my sister Laila left it. Implementation, implementation, implementation. So we do have the institutions that were playing the role of the diplomacy within different UN organizations. And when we take the examples, we always need to fight before to get the seat as an institution, as or as recognized within the system of how it's working at the international level. So we need to move from fighting to getting this seat to having this seat as normal and sitting at the tables as decision makers, because it's not the time anymore to fight to get these recognitions. While we get the UN DRIP since 20 years, and we get all the recognition through many other UN and not UN organizations, through many governments. So it's the time to recognize that we are also a decision makers. So it is not only we are not a state, we cannot take a part, we just have to sit as observer. We are so different than observer that they are calling. We are not a civil society. We are a movement, we are a peoples. We have a communities within our peoples, and we have the solutions that we are bringing to the world. So we are playing the role inside the state, but inside a regions. So our governance, it is not limited to just one state, or it is not limited to a NGO or a civil society movement. It is broader than this. So that's why the first step that the relationship need to change as being a diplomat inside those systems. So we have to be a decision makers. And in order to be a decision makers, it's have to create another norm within the UN organizations and other organizations, because we do have also the World Bank, who is not part of the UN. We have many other institutions who are so international but are not part of the UNs. So they need to change the way of sitting and organizing the body. And one of the examples who can be very concrete, it's within the CBD. So the UN CBD going to be revising the working group. It's need to move from being a working group and working in silo, just inputting from time to time and negotiating with the state, to be a full seat as a body within the conventions. So this is just one of examples. But we have also like permanent forum, ESPER mechanism, who are playing the roles. So I know that during this time, like as permanent forum members, we are having meeting with all the UN bodies, and all of them, when they talk, they have like divisions who in charge of indigenous peoples, or they have focal point in charge of indigenous peoples. Then they wanted to work with us, but the issue is still the same. We are talking to them as NGO to a UN institutions. They do not consider as it is a body of the UN institutions who can talk with them and exchange with them in a deep narrative of what they are doing. So that needs to be understood. If we are expert and recognized as diplomat, indigenous people diplomat within these institutions, so it have to be, we take the decision and we tell them how they can change it. And when they change it, it has to be applied not only at the international level, but at the regional level and at the national level. Because it is so different what the national offices of the UN implementing or negotiating or discussing, but with what is decided at the international level. So we have to go there and beg. Like you have to recognize indigenous peoples, but the UN DRIP have been adopted at the General Assembly. So this disconnection needs to be in coherence, coordinated and implemented at the local level, where indigenous peoples can go there and say we are a partners. And finally, indigenous peoples within those organizations cannot be seen as a beneficiaries. They have to be seen as a partners. If we seen as a partners, so they cannot think about, okay, let us give them the money to implement, but they will think about, let us design it together and we can implement it together in order to have our place. Thank you.
Well, it's amazing. And I would like to start just to follow what you said, that we are not a civil society group, we are a movement. So that's really powerful. And yeah, and we're bringing solutions to also to everybody, you know. And just the last one that says, you know, we don't have to be seen just as a beneficiaries, also as a partners. So just following on that, I had another question, but just I will go straight just about the future-proofing Indigenous people rights. What does the movement need to do today so that we don't regret not doing it in 7 years? So I would like to start with Tuomas, please.
Thank you. That's a tricky question. I was kind of in the mood on continuing what Hindou was talking, and we'll give only a short comment on that, and maybe others can.
No, please, you can do it and then follow it.
Yes, I agree with Hindou that what she was also saying, that we are not a civil society, we are peoples. Now, inside of the UN structure, there are institutions, but I think it's important to remember that the right of self-determination is among the peoples, and the peoples have to represent themselves. There isn't an institutions, United Nations expert mechanisms can take that or take that right away, or and I'm not saying nobody's even trying to do that, but they cannot try to represent the indigenous peoples themselves. The peoples have to represent themselves, and that is, I think, the core of the enhanced participation discussion also. And I think that is the important aspect to remember. Sometimes those national issues, the implementations, what the indigenous peoples have been saying for like 30 years, 20 years, haven't been moving forward. The international level comes as the last effort, or not last effort, but maybe the last space where you can try to get impact to your national issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's going to be really nice also to see or to listen the youth point of view. Please, Carson, Kiburo, brother, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, my brother. I would like to just say a few words, and it's good to speak always after having very experienced elders or those who are older than you speak, because they always have a lot of wisdom and experience. But since we don't have a lot of time, let me just get it done by saying a few words. Well, I think the key word is to never relent, to always push towards a bigger space, to strive for meaningful engagement, of course, contextualized in diplomacy aspect. The difficult challenge for the indigenous youth, the greatest challenge, of course, is resources, also exposure to the spaces. As Hindou mentioned before, most of them cannot access these resources like the internet and all that. So those who find themselves in these spaces because of, let's say, privilege, but some of them will have to fight, but we have quality representation from the ground. We have so many constituencies that would like to include indigenous youth in their programs, but the challenge is how these spaces are framed. I can go into details because most of you have spoken about that. And in the UN context, we would like to have our space in our participation to be meaningful as well. And because we are growing in terms of organizations and experts with very solid experiences and power from our communities, we need to strategically map these resources and build a powerful synergy that will implement whatever we want in whatever kind of whatever kind of a table. Could it be a UN? Is it a big NGO or any agency? And so a coordinated participation is key with our allies as well. And I will close with Laila's mantra: don't forget the implementation gap. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carson. And as you said, that there is one of the most important step of our life, the youth, and still growing, and so learning a lot. So it's important to have all the information on hand, and so that it can be one of the bridge to do it. So please welcome Brother Raja. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Brother Nkelefe. Can you hear me? I'll try to go over many of the things brought in by our friends and colleagues. I'll start with my niece, Laila. I'm Uncle Dave to her. Many of the points Laila brought in about the gaps and so forth. And in a way, I was just thinking that what Laila teaches, I don't know what Anthony maybe may get, I practiced. Not that in Laila, I'm saying that what you do it in words and your writing, I do it in implemented in action. No. I will not be so arrogant or vain. What I mean is, I work with those things at the level. So like last 3 months, what I have been doing, monitoring what relief went to our communities who did not have rice, food security. What happened to their water security? Put in, pipes to bring in water from the waterfalls because they have no mains water, to bring the pipe of 500 meters or even 1 kilometer or more to the village to drink and things like that, and COVID testing machines. But well, you guys know I used to go to New York and sometimes Geneva. But what really still worries me are, as I think Laila said it, the gaps, and Ghazali said, spreading ourselves too thin. I'm an indigenous diplomat from my people. How many meetings did I used to go to anyway, for example? And how many of maybe 3, 4, Vinota is here with us, or was, and a few others to go to New York, to MRIP after MRIP happened, occasionally meeting special rapporteur indigenous peoples or some of the other rapporteurs. So my question is actually firstly, the links between the major UN mechanisms. And second, what do those people at the national and local levels do with those resolutions that happen or didn't happen, that we tried to happen, and translate it or help translate it, for God's sake. I'm 60 plus, I'm traditional chief, my son will take over, so when I kick the bucket, so I'm already talking to him about it. So there will be struggles that will remain for the next generation. For God's sake, we're not going to, solve all the problems of this world. But in our generation, the UN declarations happened 2007. And if you guys have the patience, I made a small film, and Melanie is not here with us. She would laugh at my amateur photography, but it's called The Spirit of Pascua, mostly in Mexico, where the big gaps between the states and the indigenous peoples was broken by indigenous diplomacy and state diplomacy to bring a win-win. I can send it to you by email, Ghazali, and where the buzzword was constructive ambiguity. Megan should listen, she's the professor out here, and Laila, and many others maybe, where states and indigenous agreed to keep certain things non-concrete, non-specific. So either can wiggle out of this situation and say, I meant this, but it still meant we have a declaration. We had certain articles in the UN declarations, which happened, for example, in Pascua. You see my video, but it's not the logic. But so the thing is that how do we get win-win situations at the 3 IP mechanisms and the treaty bodies, the high-level political forum on sustainable development, I don't know, the G7 summits and back-to-back meetings and the climate change, but much more importantly, at the national levels. So how do I tell my minister planning? I was so happy to get 2 ministers on a webinar in Bangladesh. I'm nobody now, I have no titles and never a chief in my region. So to get the ministers, 2 ministers are a thing, the planning minister who deals with SDGs, and I said, how about a minister, what are you doing with SDGs in relation to, in context of primary, secondary education, of peace, justice, for women, textualize, nationalize, relocalize, all those nice words taken at summits in New York and Geneva. So my question is that where the missing point of whatever Laila had used, the gaps, is this, that not always, I'm not saying everybody has a gap and everybody's just only doing talking shop. No. But what I'm saying is this, that those people who go to Geneva, New York, and follow the CBD and the climate change conferences, and those people who stay at home, or those people who go to both places, and then try to translate rights. And I was looking at all those things, they're all related, whether it's constitutional recognition, whether it's participation, I myself said yes to 1 or 2 of the things, they're all related. So my point, do we see the game, the end game for the next 2, 3, 5 years, 3 months, and in the next 10 years, in the next generation, for the next lot of indigenous activists that are coming, who we help train, and so that they can get advantage of all those things, good and bad, that we have learned in New York, Geneva, and at home. So my point is that, number one, is that SDGs are a huge tool, because at least we have it for another, I forget how many, 8, 10, 12 years. Anyway, so SDGs, nobody can, and it's because it's qualitative and not quantitative. Even one person left behind is the failure of the goals. And there are targets and indicators, blah, blah, blah. Let's latch on to them and look at our national planning, action plans, strategies, etc., and try to say that, hey, if you want to do this, and win-win. Now, win-win, that's where I want to bring in again, now, UN agencies at the New York and Geneva levels, regional levels in Nairobi or Bangkok or wherever they are, and or Italy, Rome, and Vienna, and in regional levels and national levels. And this is where I'm so happy to hear Maithin Yumon discuss FAO. FAO is an agency that happens all over. People in New York will not know what FAO is. I bet you. Maybe even in Copenhagen, I don't know, in Oslo, Laila, they know about FAO or not. But we know, because FAO doles out, has something to do with food, agriculture, rice farmers, grains, irrigation and all that. So those UN agencies, not all, IFAD is not there in every country, but FAO is in developing countries. UNICEF is, and many of these UN agencies are there at the country. And this is where part of the what is the global, Ghazali, but we were there, I forget the terms, the UN
World Conference?
Absolutely, man, I'm getting old. I'll be 60 soon. And
you don't look a day over 30, by the way.
don't be too flattering. You're not, no problem. So when we want to implement those national action plans and so forth, that the very nice things that the General Assembly decided after the UN declaration, what was it? What do you call that instrument? It's not an instrument, the UN General Assembly. to put the UN declaration into action. So we need all those things that governments have to do, UN agencies based at the country levels have to do, and most important, and that's where I come to, I know I'm going on a long time, indigenous peoples have to do. And this is Ghazali, that's your thing that you brought in, you guys in Kilipe, and you guys have brought in Melanie, she was here and disappeared, greetings to her. Indigenous diplomacy. We people who, have the opportunity to speak at national, local levels and UN level. Now we have to remember that some of the things, if you want to achieve, is the win-win thing. What was this constructive ambiguity I mentioned? That nobody felt they lost. So we've got the declaration. There were at least 3 to 4 articles that were agreed upon in Pascua, and then came to Geneva, and then it went to the new Human Rights Council, blah, blah, and General Assembly. So what are the things? If one person is left behind, then you can't do, that is not achievement of sustainable development goals. It is qualitative and non-quantitative. So we have this thing on the government. There are many other things, the treaty bodies, and I have been saying this for years and years and years, that with treaty bodies, all due respect to Laila and our friends at the Permanent Forum, I was there for 2 firms, so I take it myself too. Treaty bodies, every country has to report, whether you like it or not. And the difference between Permanent Forum, MRAP, and treaty bodies is this. In treaty bodies, you have a minister at the minute. Ministers go there. In MRAP and Permanent Forum, friendly countries, even the Prime Minister and President, Vice President, and Deputy Prime Minister will go. In treaty bodies, most countries, less than a minister doesn't go, because they give more importance to that. Let's make an impact. So the connection between PFII, MRIP, Special Rapporteur, and the treaty bodies, and all those other regional bodies of the UN in different regions, whether it's UNDP or FAO. And if we can put those things together and tell these guys, you're doing your work or you're not doing your work. You've forgotten us, for example. And if we get our data and statistics in place, put them, which will go to MREP, which will go to Permanent Forum, it will go to SRIP, but it will also go to all the many special rapporteurs. I don't even remember how many special rapporteurs are there. Even on internally displaced persons, I discovered 2 years ago. And I'm still working on a report to send to the Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Persons. I have in my territory 40,000 families, total of nearly 100,000. Sorry, I've taken a long time. So I think we can still work with all our combined experience, wisdom, professors, activists, all sorts of people, and increase the impact we have of the UN Declaration and related instruments and whatever UN documents to take home our civil, political, economic, social, cultural rights. But I will just end with that thing. Different strategies may be necessary for economic, social, and cultural rights. We can generally go under the rubric of development. But where it's civil and political rights, the West always remembers the individual rights and forgets the collective rights. Americans, Europeans generally do not understand collective rights unless they happen to be Sámi and Inuit or whatever it is. So we have to remember that and accordingly plan our strategies to try to get attention where we need. Thank you very much. You.
Thank you very much, brother. Please, Rodion, I give you the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Because of time pressure and I have to leave in the next couple of minutes to join another call. And my final comments before saying goodbye, with regards to the implementation. I think one of the biggest dot and gap on our way to implementation is the lack of oversight mechanism under the United Nations. And I believe many of us remembered very well our strong effort to provide oversight function to NRIP, particularly in order to follow up hundreds and thousands of recommendations generated by MRIP and the Permanent Forum. but there is still question. And I believe we as a movement, we should elaborate this opportunity and put more pressure. The second point is, yes, of course, we can applaud and congratulate the United Nations in terms of progress towards the indigenous people rights and framework based on the United Nations Declaration. But also we should always keep in mind that we use United Nations as a political platform for our visibility, political advocacy, and voice, particularly to send message to national leaders and to private sector. And so that is our final destination and final targets: national governments and private sector. And we have to strengthen our focus on the business. And the third point, now it's time to move forward and switch our focus, not just raising the issue of our cultural heritage, but also to be more ambitious and to raise the issue of our natural heritage, particularly related to our land rights and territorial rights. So that is the next step, and I believe there are a lot of work to do in the future, and that is my final comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, brother. Now we have Hindou, and then followed by Binod. Please, Hindou.
Yeah, firstly, I would like to thank all of you for this panel. And I wish that we will have this kind of discussions. And I wanted to know, like, how are we going to use this very useful information we share? How are we going to continue this kind of discussions, but building it up for the future and for the better? And you just say that we can say like our last word in these discussions. So my last one will be from next week. It will be SDGs who will be online. Raja, thank you for saying that SDG is really important. So it's going to be the week of the height level of the SDGs. It's going to be the week of the UN General Assemblies. It's going to be the week of CBD. And it's going to be like a month before the virtual meeting of the UNFCCC. So the international movement will go on. So how are we going to organize to better get the power on it? On the SDGs first, I think if we all can advocate to get localized implementation, localized SDGs, and not implement SDG in silo, but all the 17 goals to be localized on the indigenous people's context. And to the General Assembly, we don't have the chance this year to meet as permanent forum or MRIP to send them the reports. But we still can send them all the messages that we want through joining the internationals opening events. So it will be a lot of opening events if we can go through the website and see through the open events to join there and make our voices hear. I know some of us are invited to the panels, but it is not enough. We need to join and then raise our voices in order to make them understand we are there. Even we are excluded from those platforms, but we are there. For the CBD, who will be the last week from the 29, it will be very good to coordinate with our CBD peoples, but also to join and say we wanted to have more than just having a working group. And it's not have to be only to be in the paper, but for us, it is urgent to implement. We say it's 10 years for climate change, but also 10 years for biodiversity. I swear to you, in my hometown, people moving with a canoe in the city from one home to another one. People lose them homes, lose them lives because of the floods. And in my opening, I taught you that because of the heat, the computers and phone are not working. So we are going very, very fast on the extreme weather events. So it's to push them, those 10 years for CBD, 10 years for UNFCCC, 10 years for the SDGs, for indigenous peoples around the world. It's about tomorrow. So that's why we need to act on these weeks, and looking forward to the next discussions. And if anyone from the participant to the panelists, I will be very happy to chat with you. And then if any time that we have, let us keep in touch, coordinate, and make our movement the ongoing one. And thank you so much again.
Thank you very much, sister. So how we are running out of time, please, I need you to be concise. And please, we have Vinota and then followed by my, please, Vinota.
I thank you. Because there are many good points we have already heard from Laila, Megan, Devasish, Rodion, and other colleagues. I fully agree about this implementation issue at the domestic level and to strengthen our movement organizations. But what I'd like to draw your attention as well here is, I think we need to discuss about this, how we can bring back our advocacy as a movement organization. That's because if you have observed this development, this is the question again come whether states pushed against us in many ways, because we don't see Secretary General never come to our UN forum meetings, in the permanent forum. And also if we see the high level participation issue also, most of the cases even high levels officials, they don't take part, but not only the Secretary General issue, also the UN agencies as well. So this also this is the thing we have to see here. Another thing is the participation and the nomination of the permanent forum, the members as well. We also need to see how our diplomacy is, because last time the permanent forum nominations, they suddenly rapidly changed the 12 members new, instead of reappointing the old second term, the first time members. So you see, there are many indigenous people organizations, their approach also this self-selection process, which is also part of the self-determination too. It was also, we see the obstruction here. So there's the thing that we have to see as well from our advocacy and diplomacy side where we are now. Whether there is a flag of the good faith or betrayed by the state with us. This is also a little concerning from my point of view. And also the enhanced participation issue, I don't think we see it somewhere is stuck for the indigenous people. So we all here also what I feel we need to really strengthen our participations in the decision-making process at the General Assembly, Council, and other UN mechanisms. And what I like to say at the end, what I like to conclude is, see, what I feel these days, our discussion in the permanent forum or AMDIP, those who are participating, the way I see most of the organizations really advocates more their activity supports on the country level rather than how actually strengthen the movement thing. So this is where we need to really to started discussions within the indigenous peoples organizations who are participating, how we can strengthen our political rights issue, our political rights movement, and at the domestic level. That's why also strengthen our movement organizations to push forward our demand the implementation of the recommendations. So thank you so much once again, all the host members and the panelists, colleagues who are hearing. So have a good time.
Thank you, Brother Binota. Now we have Maitai, and then followed by Maitin, and then followed by our brother Pavel closing this amazing event. Please, Susanne.
Okay. Thank you, Inequilipi. So listening to all the speakers from your very rich experience and all your insights, I think I have added a few points to the preparation that I made for this intervention. One thing that I'm really happy to see, to hear at this discussion is about localizing things and our actions and the impacts, the implementation at the local level. So that has been something that I've also felt as an since I started engaging in different UN mechanisms, including the UNFCCC, Permanent Forum, MRIP, and what I always, whenever I came back from all these different meetings, that I always feel is there is more work to do, and that is the work at home. So most of the actions need to be based at home. So we need to have a very strong stronghold at the country level, at the local level, at the home base. So in order to strengthen also those, to see the implementation at the local level, what I'm seeing is, as a youth, I feel and I believe that we need more experts in different fields. Because when we have been talking about the movement for so long, and it has mainly been building the activism of indigenous youths, and this activism has been transferred from generation to generation, and like we have been building activism in different fields under the framework, let's say the framework of the Indigenous Peoples movement. But working at the country level and at the local level, what we have been really lacking is people who speak the languages of governments, who speak the languages of development partners. So when we speak two different languages, the development partners and all like the bureaucrats speak a different language, and indigenous people speak different language. So it's at the local level, it has always been a gap in communicating with each other. So I would really also like to request our leaders, our elders, is to encourage our indigenous youths not only to be active in this like movement, not only in the movement, but also to build up themselves to be experts in the relevant fields. So when I say experts, of course, we have these indigenous lawyers, and mainly we have these like anthropologists, and this is our selection of fields of study has always been influenced by the by our leaders and the movement, and we aimed our studies to be helpful and to contribute into the movement. So I think we have reached to a time when indigenous peoples, we really need like experts who speak those the languages that are spoken in different venues. We need people who can represent us, who really grow up with these indigenous values, and then also can represent us. So I would really like to request our elders and our leaders to encourage our youths to really aim for, to be more ambitious. And also the gap that we are seeing is when we talk about implementation, the gap not only comes from policies. Sometimes we have really good policy, but the gap and problems come from the bureaucrats. So I think time has come for us. So because the question was also, what do we need to do so that we don't regret in the next 7 years? So I would like to encourage ourselves to really aim for, to have people in these decision-making positions other than just advocating towards the decision makers, but ourselves to be those decision makers. So when we talk about decision makers, we have always been talking about within our indigenous systems, but I would like to expand that beyond our indigenous governance systems and to, how should I say, to blend into the existing mainstream society and then like the existing political systems. So I think it's time for us to really encourage our youths and our leaders to go into not only indigenous politics, but also the politics as in a wider scope, so that they can be there and work for us from within. That is my other point. And the other point is that what I'm seeing is that also we like throughout the session, like people, our leaders and experts have talked a lot about like having so many like indigenous organizations and NGOs like rising up and being vocal in the past few decades. And I think what we are, and there was a point, I correct me if I'm wrong, because we have our elders here who have been leading indigenous movements in different ways. So there was a time when indigenous institutions were really strong in like like 2000, between 1990s and like 2000, when like for example in Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact was formed, and then like they gained momentum in like mobilizing indigenous organizations. But now with the changing also environment and like the influence from maybe from modernization or different factors, I think institutionalizing has become a little bit weak in different parts of indigenous among us. And we also saw a few like misunderstandings, and there were in nominating like indigenous representatives to, for example, for Asia, in nominating indigenous representative to the permanent forum and things like that. And we used to be very organized, but it turned out to be like there are some points when we see like gaps when government and like sometimes agencies use to co-opt the people who would listen to them. So I think it's really time for us to step back a little bit, and then like you all already shared, we are stretching like too thin, or so I think we have come to the time, and I think COVID can offer us some opportunity to step back a little bit and then to re-strategize, rethinking, and to reformat our way of really trying to influence the decision makings at different levels to be in favor of indigenous peoples. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sister Martin. So we follow with our brother, closing on our brother Pavel. Please, Pavel, you got the floor.
Thank you. I will be quite brief. First of all, I agree, Martin, and I would like to speak out a little bit more about this subject, which is very important. It is the one that we meet within the UN, and we discuss several issues. And people in our regions do not understand why do we need such meetings. And it is very important to show the link between the global level and their support. We need to explain how this work is connected, because they're very far away from UN, from focal points, and they don't understand if those discussions are needed. We need to underline and highlight this link. I heard a lot that a lot of communities do not trust the processes going on the international level because they do not see this link and connection, and they do not see the help from the decisions taken on the global level. I think this is what we have to work on. This is what we have to advocate on. We have to show the mechanisms on using and on implementing those decisions taken on the international level. I think this is an important thing to do. Another point I would like to discuss is I've seen a question on Indigenous people not taking part in the process of developing the international document that would concern the business and human rights. I think it is a very important process and it's a very problematic one. The issue of private sector and the business issues in general that cover the territory and the resources of Indigenous people that are usually quite traumatic for us. We must take part in this UN process that goes today. I think it is very important to do in order to show the rights of Indigenous peoples and the business-related problems. I would also like to say thank you to the whole team that initiated this series of episodes that founded this platform. I hope that we will repeat this experience in future so we could exchange our experience and opinions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Thank you very much for all your thoughts and comments today. I just want to give the microphone to Ghazali, the host of Goma Loco podcast, to share his final thoughts and a sneak preview of where we will go from here. Please, Ghazali, you got the floor.
Oh, thank you so much, Ini, and everyone else for participating not only today, but in the last 8 episodes. It was quite an achievement, I guess, and also your energy, your thoughts, your kindness, most of all, very much appreciated. Before I start with everything, happy birthday, Melanie! It's your birthday today. We didn't know as a team. She's part of the team, but she didn't tell us it was her birthday. So I don't know if that's is a good thing or a bad thing in terms of our relationship as a team. Sorry about that. We appreciate everyone as always. Interpreters, you have been with us for the last 8 episodes. A lot of you are coming back every episode, so very much appreciative. Full disclosure, you have to know that these interpreters are doing this all voluntarily, and they're doing it's such an amazing job, and really appreciate their time, and they're very flexible. So definitely big shout out, big thank you to the interpreters and Joseph, of course, for doing all of this. Yeah, so at the beginning of this whole episode, I'm not going to summarize all 8 episodes because that will keep us here for another 4 or 5 hours. I'm sure that you all have other business to attend to. So I'll limit myself to a sneak preview of what's to come. I had 2 hours to think about it because when Ini and Tomo told me, like, well, just give me a sneak preview of what's coming up next. I really haven't figured it out yet. Like, I do know that this will not be the end. The end of this webinar series, of course, that is for certain. But we do see that, for example, like what Pavel said, business and human rights or indigenous rights. We talked about climate change. We talked about at length about self-determination, at length about enhanced participation, and still we have not touched the surface. We still have not gone deep into something. And that is the idea behind this whole webinar series, to coordinate with one another and talk about really important strategize actually as a movement. Right now, COVID is doing us a favor, like quote unquote, because we don't have to travel. We're all at home. So at least we can talk to each other. All right, what is happening right now in business and human rights? What is happening right now in climate change? What is happening right now in enhanced participation process? And of course, we could jump right into enhanced participation process. We could jump right into climate change. But I found it very important that we first start talking about, right, what are your initial ideas. So we started with the one-on-one conversation so that people can get to know Pavel, can get to know Professor Megan Davis, Laila, and Carson, Mighty Newman, everyone. So what we're going to do, we have not figured out the timeline yet, but it will definitely be this year. As Hindou already said, the UN is waking up. It's starting to like the General Assembly is right next on the agenda. Things are going to happen. So we have to find a way to make sure that we can find the right dates to do the following, and which is we will go see it as like a virtual permanent forum, as in we're going deep into the matter of self-determination. We're going deep into constitutional recognition. We're going deep into business and indigenous rights or human rights. We're going deep into climate change. We're going deep into oceans. Right now, while we still have the time, it's very important that we do that right now. Because as you all have said, like 8 episodes, and of course there are so many more webinars out there, and I respectfully I'm trying to follow as much as possible, but I do see that there's so many webinars, but there's no, either they touch the surface but they don't go deep into something, and we have to go deep right now. If you talk about future-proofing the movement, we have to go deep into the issues that affect us. We cannot tackle all of them, but we will definitely tackle the right to self-determination, claiming the right to self-determination, how you exercise your right to self-determination in everything that you do, because that is like the basis of everything. So we're going to start with that, and then move into business and human rights, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's a taste. A sneak preview of what myself and the team are going to work on the next couple of days, weeks, and hopefully, of course, the panelists and other people are more than welcome to weigh in on what you think, how we should structure it, because it will not be, trust me, it will not be like quick 2 hours. It almost like a whole day of conversations, because I think that is needed. Like, we do it not every day, of course, but like once a week, maybe something along those lines. Just are what we're working with. As another sneak preview, this whole endeavor has taken us a lot of time and a lot of effort, and we want other indigenous peoples to do the same. So that people from Russia, indigenous people from Russia, Africa, Latin America, the Pacific, all around the world can do the same. So tomorrow we will do like a behind the scenes, like not behind it, a how to do all this, how to organize this, how to provide invitations and everything else, so that you can do it too. It is no use that myself, Dosip, and Drumbeat Media and TV Indigena, like that everything had to go to us. That's not used to the movement. Like the movement has to be stronger. And there's a lot of things that are very, like Martin Newman said, place-based. So that my team can do something similar in Asia. Hindou can do something similar, and Carson can do something similar in Africa. So that we keep building up this movement, because we have to make the movement stronger. If we do not do this, you can talk all about future-proofing, but it's it will only be an idea of future-proofing the movement, and we actually have to make the movement future-proof. So I don't know, like if Tuomas wants to, Tuomas, the one that started with all this, that came up with the idea, he will step out of the role of president of the summer parliament in Finland for a brief moment, and to do what he calls a slow jam. So like interview like the whole team about like how do you do this, what are the ideas, and maybe Tuomas, briefly, you would like to talk about something about that, or should I uppercut myself and stand in the corner? Tuomas,
I can do it. Like tomorrow, come and listen.
What
See
time?
the slow
What
jam.
time?
2 p.m. same. 2 p.m. Geneva CTE. Come and see, hear the slow jam, hear the group behind how they did it, what kind of analysis they have from each of the episode, who was remembering, who was coding nicely, just jamming with the group and give their space as they've been giving the space for us. So join us tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Tuomas. And I'll I only have said a couple of things, but I'll now give the floor back to the distinguished the moderators. Oh, well, before, of course, the team could not have done this without the team. People see me, but like but the team have been doing all of this. I'm not getting nostalgic or emotional, but I do have to recognize the team, all the efforts behind the scenes. I see Tuomas getting emotional already. So just the team, of course, which includes DOSIP, which includes Drumbeat Media, TV Indigena, and Tuomas as a person as well. Carson has been a panelist, as well as the creative guy behind the scenes doing all the cuts. So everything that you see on YouTube, that's him. You see Tomo, our quote detective, Ini, our perfect host. Who else? Jocelyn, well, another perfect host. Who else? Hokabed is also a good host. So like working together on this. And of course, we need more people. So if you want to help us out, please do. That's it. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, thanks, Ghazali and Tuomas, for your comments and your thoughts for the next 24 hours, so to say, and the future. And we really hope that you can join us tomorrow in the future as we proceed with this conversation forward. So in closing, I want to thank all our guests and Roundtable for this Roundtable episode of How to Indigenous Governance and Diplomacy for Now webinar series. If you're watching this from Zoom or Facebook, we hope you enjoyed it. We thank the interpreters 100% for their amazing support, often going over time. And of course, the guests for sharing their thoughts and time. Ini?
Yes, brother. This was the final episode of the How to Indigenous Governments and Diplomacy for the Now webinar series. We hope you have enjoyed. We would like to thank the interpreters again, that we couldn't have done this without them. Also to our partner in Goma Loco Podcasts, DOSIP, Drumbeat Media, TV Indigena, gracias. A special thanks to Tuomas Aslak Juuso, and greetings from Abya Yala to all of you. Thank you very much.